Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Lemongelli. I am the publicist and events coordinator at Book Review, the largest independent bookstore on Long Island, New York. This evening, I'm honored and excited to bring you Book Review's new literary series called Write America. The aim of Write America is to write America as one writes a shaky boat. That is, to help set the country back on a correct, productive course of freedom, justice, equality, and plain human kindness. For the past few years, America has been dangerously divided on every level, racially, ethnically, politically, economically, to the extent that too many people are at one another's throats and no longer acknowledge that we belong to the same human family. The underlying purpose of writing at its best is to unify, to remind everyone that we experience the same joys, fears, shames, sorrows, and ambitions. Whatever the difference among us, however deep they go, we share the same feelings and are moved by the same things: heroism, honor, kindness, love. Great writing, great literature, speaks to those common bonds. Roger Rosenblatt, the esteemed writer and creator of Write America, put it this way: writing makes justice desirable, evil intelligible, grief endurable, and love possible. So welcome, and please join us every Monday evening at this time, as many of the most beloved and distinguished writers in the country read from their works and talk to each other and with you in an effort to bring us together. Tonight, Book Review launches Write America with a reading and conversation with Rita Dove and Billy Collins, both former National Poet Laureates. I will return afterwards to bring the two acclaimed poets your questions and comments. So now, a little more about our speakers. Rita Dove won the Pulitzer Prize for her third book of poetry, Thomas and Beulah, in 1987, and was U.S. Poet Laureate from 1993 to 1995. She received the National Humanities Medal from President Clinton and the National Medal of Arts from President Obama. Rita is the only poet to receive both. Her many honors include the 2017 NAACP Image Award, the Heinz Award in the Arts and Humanities, and the Academy of American Poets' Wallace Stevens Award. She is the Henry Hoynes Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Virginia. Her 11th collection of poetry, Playlist for the Apocalypse, is forthcoming from W.W. Norton this summer. In conversation with Rita tonight is Billy Collins. Billy is the author of 12 collections of poetry, including The Rain in Portugal, Aimless Love, Ballistics, The Trouble with Poetry, Sailing Alone, and most recently, Whale Day. He is also the editor of Poetry 180, Turning Back to Poetry, 180 More, Extraordinary Poems for Every Day, and Bright Wings, an illustrated anthology of poems about birds. A former distinguished professor at Lehman College of the City of University of New York, Collins served as Poet Laureate of the United States from 2001 to 2003, and as the New York State Poet from 2004 to 2006. In 2016, he was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. So please welcome to the screen, Rita Dove and Billy Collins. Hi, Rita.
Hey, Lauren, how are you today?
Good. Hi, Billy.
Hi.
All right. Thank you. Take it away.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start off first reading, and then first of all, I just have to say it's really such a pleasure to be here with Billy tonight, share a few poems, a little conversation, and on this first ever segment of Write America, which is Roger Rosenblatt's really brilliant and I think necessary brainchild. So thank you, Roger, and it's great to see you, Billy, and I'll kick off things with this poem. Testimonial. Back when the earth was new and heaven just a whisper, back when the names of things hadn't had time to stick, back when the smallest breezes melted summer into autumn, when all the poplars quivered sweetly in rank and file, the world called and I answered. Each glance ignited to a gaze. I caught my breath and called that life, swooned between spoonfuls of lemon sorbet. I was pirouette and flourish. I was filigree and flame. How could I count my blessings when I didn't know their names? Back when everything was still to come, luck leaked out everywhere. I gave my promise to the world, and the world followed me here. This poem comes out of my collected, and the poem right after that is really kind of a sister poem. It's a kind of a talk back to that one called Dawn Revisited. Imagine you wake up with a second chance. The blue jay hawks his pretty wares, and the oak still stands spreading glorious shade. If you don't look back, the future never happens. How good to rise in sunlight in the prodigal smell of biscuits, eggs, and sausage on the grill. The whole sky is yours to write on, blown open to a blank page. Come on, shake a leg. You'll never know who's down there frying those eggs if you don't get up and see. That's really, I'm a night person, so it's really hard for me to get up to get those eggs and that sausage. This next poem, people wonder what happens when tragedy happens to you. What happens when your house burns down? And the only answer I can think of is to dance across the ashes. It's what my husband and I did when our house burned down. It was struck by lightning some years ago. And we started taking ballroom dance lessons. And I think it was the rigor of those lessons, but also the pure joy of doing something right that helped us through, the despair, helped us channel some of the despair. American Smooth. We were dancing. It must have been a foxtrot or a waltz, something romantic but requiring restraint, rise and fall, precise execution as we moved into the next song without stopping, two chests heaving above a 7-league stride. Such perfect agony one learns to smile through, ecstatic mimicry being the sine qua non of American Smooth. And because I was distracted by the effort of keeping my frame, the leftward lean, head turned just enough to gaze out past your ear and always smiling, smiling, I didn't notice how still you'd become until we had done it. For 2 measures, 4, achieved flight, that swift and serene magnificence before the earth remembered who we were and brought us down. When thinking about what to read tonight, I thought about this poem, which was written actually about nearly 30 years ago. I shudder to say those words. I was a poet laureate, but it does seem as pertinent now as it did then. I've been asked to read at the ceremony commemorating the 200th anniversary of the U.S. Capitol. And there had been a massive restoration campaign to prepare for that ceremony, during which the statue that was on top of the Capitol, Lady Freedom, had been taken down to be cleaned up. And that irony kept haunting me as I watched her standing in the parking lot of the Capitol building, surrounded by scaffolding, looking essentially homeless. Lady Freedom among us. Don't lower your eyes or stare straight ahead to where you think you ought to be going. Don't mutter, oh no, not another one. Get a job, fly a kite, go bury a bone. With her old-fashioned sandals, with her leaden skirts, with her stained cheeks and whiskers and heaped up trinkets, she has risen among us in blunt reproach. She has fitted her hair under a hand-me-down cap and spruced it up with feathers and stars. Slung over one shoulder, she bears the rainbowed layers of charity and murmurs, all of you, even the least of you. Don't cross to the other side of the square. Don't think another item to fit on a tourist's agenda. Consider her drenched gaze, her shining brow. She who has brought mercy back into the streets and will not retire politely to the potter's field. Having assumed the thick skin of this town, its gritted exhaust, its sun-scorch and blear, she rests in her weathered plumage, big-boned, resolute. Don't think you can ever forget her. Don't even try. She's not going to budge. No choice but to grant her space, crown her with sky, for she is one of the many, and she is each of us. And I'm going to turn the clock forward a little bit and read a few poems that are coming out in my next book. Playlist for the Apocalypse is coming out this summer. I recently collaborated with a composer, Richard Daniel Poor, on a cycle of poems that was called A Standing Witness. And this is the first poem in that cycle, Beside the Golden Door. Surely there must be something beautiful to smile upon. The umbered blue edge of sky as it fades into evening, the brusque green heave of the sea. When I look up, surely there will be a cloud or a lone star dangling. Truth is, the truth has gone walking, left her perch for the doves and ravens to ravage, hightailed it to the hills, to the quiet beyond rivers and trees. No matter what ragged carnival may be thronging the streets, what bleak homestead or plantation of sorrows howling its dominion, truth would say these are arrogant times. Believers slaughtered their doubters, while the greedy oil their lips with excuses, and the righteous turn merciless, the merciful mad. I know that's not very cheerful, but I'd like to turn to a poem. I think the times in this poem are even direr, if that can be. The speaker in this poem is Alice Herz-Sommer, who was a survivor of Theresienstadt, a concentration camp that the Nazis sent many of the composers and the musicians to. And these composers and musicians were then forced to stage cheerful parades for visiting dignitaries. There's an epigraph from Shakespeare as well. Transit. If music be the food of love, play on. This is a house that music built. Each note of fingertips purchased rung upon rung, laddering across the unspeakable world. As for those other shrill facades, rigged for a day porticos composed to soothe regiments of eyes, guilt-reddened, lining the parade route, horn flash, woodwind wail. Well, let them cheer. I won't speak judgment on the black water passing for coffee, white water for soup. We supped instead each night on Chopin, hummed our grief-soaked lullabies to the rapture rippling through. Let it be said, while in the midst of horror, we fed on beauty, and that, my love, is what sustained us. And these last two poems are, one of them was written right before the pandemic hit, and the last one afterwards. Pedestrian Crossing, Charlottesville. A gaggle of girls giggle over the bricks leading off Court Square. We break dutifully and wait, but there's at least 20 of these knob-kneed creatures, blonde and curly, still at an age that thinks impudence is cute. Look how they dart and dither, changing flanks as they lurch along, golden goblets of infuriating foolishness or pure joy, depending on one's disposition. At the moment, mine's sour. This is taking far too long. Don't they have minders? Just behind my shoulder in the city park, the Southern General still stands, stonewalling us all. When I was their age, I judged Goldilocks nothing more than a pint-sized criminal who flounced into others' lives, then assumed their clemency. Unfair, I know, my aggression, to lump them into a gaggle, silly geese, when all they're guilty of is being young. so far. And I'll end with this. It's a small voice of the spring cricket. Postlude. You prefer me invisible, no more than a crisp salute, far away from your silks and firewood and woolens. Out of sight, I'm merely an annoyance, one slim, obstinate wrinkle in night's deepening trance. When sleep fails, you wish me shushed and back in my hole. As usual, you're not listening. Time stops only if you stop long enough to hear it passing. This is my business. I've got 10 weeks left to croon through. What you hear is a lifetime of song. So thank you so much. And Billy, take it away.
Okay. Oh, that was terrific and great to hear you. And great to be here and kicking off this this series that I'm eager to watch develop. I'm going to read a few poems from this new book called Whale Day that show the product, they say. It has a whale flying through a kind of apocalyptic sky. And this is a poem called Walking My 75-Year-Old Dog. She's painfully slow, so I often have to stop and wait while she examines some roadside weeds as if she were reading the biography of a famous dog. And she's not a pretty sight anymore, dragging one of her hind legs, her coat too matted to brush or comb, and a snout white as a marshmallow. We usually walk down a disused road that runs along the edge of a lake whose surface trembles in a high wind and is slow to ice over as the months grow cold. We don't walk very far before she sits down on her worn haunches and looks up at me with her rheumy eyes. Then it's time to carry her back to the car. Just thinking about the honesty in her eyes, I realize I should tell you she's not really 75. She's 14. I guess I was trying to appeal to your sense of the bizarre, the curiosities of the sideshow. I mean, who really cares about another person's dog? Everything else I've said is true, except the part about her being 14. I mean, she's old, but not that old, and it's not polite to divulge the true age of a lady. And this poem is called Life Expectancy. It's another one of those ways to tell that you're getting along. Life expectancy. On the morning of a birthday that ended in a zero, I was looking out at the garden when it occurred to me that the robin on her worm hunt in the dewy grass had a good chance of outliving me, as did the worm itself for that matter, if he managed to keep his worm head down. It was not always like this. For decades, I could assume that I would be around longer than the squirrel dashing up a tree or the nightly raccoons in the garbage, longer than the barred owl on a branch, the ibis, the chicken, and the horse, longer than 4 deer in a clearing, and every creature in the zoo except the elephant and the giant tortoise, whose cages I would hurry past. It was just then in my calculations that the cat padded noiselessly into the room, and it seemed reasonable, given her bright eyes and her glossy coat, to picture her at my funeral, dressed all in black as usual, which would nicely set off her red collar. Some of the mourners might pause in their grieving to notice, as she found a place next to a labradoodle in a section of the church reserved for their kind. Now, I don't usually write. It's very rare that I would write a poem about something that's actually going on in the world, in the world at large. But I did write this poem recently. It's a little 2-stanza hinge poem, and it's called After the Inauguration. Citizens from all over the country are reporting a lowering of the shoulders. They say they are breathing more easily as they inhale and exhale this abundance of American air. I too have slowed back down to my old speed of 23 miles an hour, and my pulse is as slow as a sundial. In addition, my polar bear is dancing in the living room again. The goldfish is singing in her glass bowl, and the tall palms outside seem to be acting more like themselves. Things appear to be getting back to normal, the pencil in my hand is saying as it hops across the page once more. So that was a good thing. And let's see here. I'll read the title poem and then one more poem. And the title poem is, well, obviously, Whale Day. Just a matter of finding it. Whale Day. Today I was awakened by strong coffee and the awareness that the earth is busy with whales, even though we can't see any, unless we have embarked on a whale watch, which would be disappointing if we still couldn't see any. I can see the steam rising from my yellow cup, the usual furniture scattered about, and even some early light filtering through the palms. Meanwhile, thousands of whales are cruising along at various speeds under the sea, crisscrossing one another, slaloming in and out of the Gulf Stream, some with their calves traveling alongside. Such big blunt heads they have. So is it too much to ask that one day a year be set aside for keeping in mind while we step onto a bus, consume a sandwich, or stoop to pick up a coin from a sidewalk, the multitude of these mammoth creatures coasting between the continents, for some for the sum of it, others, some for the fun of it, others purposeful in their journeys, all concealed under the sea, unless somewhere one breaks the surface with an astonishing upheaval of water, and all the people in yellow slickers rush to one side of the boat to point and shout and wonder how to tell their friends about the day they saw a whale. And the last poem, which I will say I wrote well before the COVID, the pandemic, whatever we call it. And it's called On the Death of Friends, on the Deaths of Friends. Because everyone experienced the deaths of friends. If you don't, then it means you don't have any friends. That's the good news. On the deaths of friends. Either they just die, or they get sick and die of the sickness, or they get sick, recover, then die of something else, or they get sick, appear to recover, then die of the same thing, the sickness coming back to take another bite out of you in the forest of your final hours. And there are other ways which will not be considered here. In the evening, I closed my eyes on the shore of a lake, and I pretended this is what it will look like, or will not look like. This is where my friends keep going, a place, only in quotation marks, where instead of oxygen, there is silence, unbroken by the bark of a fox in winter, or the whistle of a neglected kettle. With eyes still closed, I ran in the dark toward that silence like a man running along a train platform. And when I opened my eyes to see who was running in the opposite direction with outspread arms, there was the lake again with its ripples, a breeze coming off the water, and a low train whistle. And there was I, trembling under the trees, passing clouds, and everything else that was pouring over the mighty floodgates of the senses.
Ah,
And that's me. And now,
wonderful. Yes.
and now we have chat time.
Let's chat.
Okay, well,
That was really lovely. I mean, I've always admired how you can you make me walk with you through a day or through, and I take in every sensation quietly but intensely.
well,
That's what yeah. So thank you for
I
that.
usually like to start in a place, like it's even something very ordinary, like it's Tuesday and it's raining. And I always feel that I like to orient the reader early on and make very few or no demands, and make a pronouncement that is incontestably true, like it's raining and I'm looking out the window at a robin. I mean, if you give up at that point, you're really not.
You're not watching, right? Yeah.
You don't have much patience with poetry. And then I figure that the reader can be disoriented later on if the reader knows where he or she is in the beginning, they can be moved into less familiar places. But so, and
Yeah.
I do love that poem. The last one you read, I think about because I like the girls walking across the crosswork, is it? The geese?
Yes.
The pedestrian crossing. And I like it because you show some anger there. You usually don't show much of that.
No, I was raised in, that you just could not show your anger or else you might end up dead or you might end up, somehow you had to have restraint. And I guess sort of like, the anger has to be whispered instead of shouted. And then they have to lean in and listen. So there's anger, but it's usually very polite, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you keep it pretty restrained there too, but you can see it's bubbling away.
Oh, yeah, it's there.
You wish they would just pick up the pace a little bit.
Oh goodness, no.
Rita, we haven't seen each other. It's lovely to see you. We haven't seen each other in quite a while.
It's true.
And the last time we met, I'm trying to remember. I think it was in Washington, I think.
Yeah.
What were we doing there?
I don't know. I mean, it was in this place. It was a large place. It had lots of pictures on the walls. The
White House.
The big White House.
The White House, right.
It was the big house, yeah. Which was, wonderful, and also it's an out of the body experience, right? I mean,
right.
Reading
yeah. Well, that was a while ago.
Quite a while ago.
At least an administration ago. And that was Obama had. I mean, there were many events there that First Lady had that had to do with poetry and song. And it was, we both read, I think, talked to some school children, right? Or some high school kids. But
Right. Who were, I think they had so much right. I mean, the Obamas, in terms of reaching out to the young and letting them be heard in a way. You've got to get them while they're young.
And letting them in the house too.
Yeah.
So
go
ahead.
No, I was just thinking about that and thinking about how much I can still see the kind of the joy and glint in their eyes, and they really wanted to. They were bursting to sing in a way, So yeah.
They also seem to be bursting with love for each other. Right? I found that.
It's true.
It seemed uncontainable.
Yeah.
So I wanted everyone's I mean, not everyone, but a question that's being battered around these days is the effect on the pandemic on creative people. And I'm wondering if I can ask you about how it's affected your writing or your sense of yourself in the world, because it's been, we're getting into a year now.
It's a year. It's a year now. It's interesting because for me, the pandemic had been almost a concealed blessing. I had been trying to finish a book. The world was very loud. I had far too many, engagements, and I was traveling everywhere and couldn't even hear myself. And so suddenly I couldn't go anywhere. And it was where I wanted to be, was to be at my desk now. And so I finished this book that had been just, lingering for years. I finished the book, but I also discovered that being in this pandemic was in a way a way for me to look deep inside of myself and say, what is really important? What is it really that you when you write that you're burning to say? So it's been good. On the other hand, it's been bad because there are times when I say to myself, what's the use of this if the world has gone completely mad? And that's that one poem where, beside the golden door, I talk about the righteous turned merciless and the merciful mad. It was in the middle of a time when it looked like everything in this country was going a little bit berserk. I just, I wanted people to sit down and just talk to one another. So it's been both of those things. I had a few problems in that, my father died during the pandemic, and I could not. He didn't die of COVID, but I couldn't go to the funeral. And that stuff is always hard. And I had an aunt who died from COVID. So I've had those moments where it really hit me viscerally. But in terms of the writing, it's a mixed bag. What about you?
Well, I mean, you would think if suddenly you have all the time in the world and your engagements and your worldly activity is completely obliterated, that you would be more creative. I mean, you have all this time. It turns out that most people, including myself, were not very productive at all, because it's not that you just have a lot of time. Well, you do, but time has been so bent out of shape, including the future has been removed, basically. Because you don't have anything on the calendar. So you don't have the normal number of things to look forward to, like next Wednesday I'm going here or whatever. So that's been wiped out. And time is like one of these Salvador Dali melting clocks. And I think that leads to more disorientation from even your work. And of course, it leads to procrastination also, because you can always do it tomorrow, because you have nothing to do for days and days and days. So it was only recently, or maybe a month or so ago, I started writing a little bit. But I wanted to sneak in. I wrote two very small poems about the. One was, they're just tiny. One was. One of my favorite images in all of English literature is in Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, where he's talking about the wind doing all sorts of things. And at one point, the wind is blowing these dead leaves across the ground. And he calls the leaves pestilence-stricken multitudes.
Yeah.
So these leaves are people fleeing a plague, right?
Yeah.
So my poem's just to take off on that. It's called Comparison. In Ode to the West Wind, Shelley calls a scattering of blown leaves pestilence-stricken multitudes. And now we are the stricken, with no place to scatter, and this year's leaves have just begun to fall.
Mm.
I always think when you're dealing with a big subject, you should. I write a small poem. Yeah.
Write a small. Yes. It's interesting because when the pandemic first started, and I think I, like a lot of people, had all these plans, and I'm a Virgo, so I'm over organized sometimes. So I said, okay, I'm going to do this and this and this, and I ended up doing 4,000-piece jigsaw puzzles too, because it was a world I could put together. I think,
1,000 pieces each. 1,000 pieces each.
Yes,
And
yes.
you did 4 of them.
I did 4 of them. Yes, and
What,
I was.
what were the pictures? What did you end up with?
Yeah, let me see. One was a picture of the Sanctuary in Italy with all those different colored houses. One was a really kitschy. I love that one actually. Kitschy, like 19th century carriage, and at night.
Mhm.
And the hardest one was a round one, which was a pizza.
Oh
And
my God, that's
God,
really tough.
I hated that one because by the end I didn't want to eat pizza again. It was
Yeah.
horrible. And then a Star Trek one, that was fun.
Wow.
But yeah,
There aren't there people who do single color puzzles
yes,
that are just
yes,
pure shape. Yeah.
and just squiggles, and you have to. No, that's not for me. I don't.
As if life weren't difficult enough, but
I don't know. I found that it calmed me a lot, and I would just do that for a little while, and I was actually thinking at the same time, and so it helped.
right.
But
I have a box of. My wife gave me a box of colored pencils, and I've been doing just some. Well, they're like landscapes. I draw a line, and then that's the horizon, and then I draw some like a mountain line, and then I make some shrubbery. But I do it in all different colors. So, but that's also, I think, yeah, if we're verbal, I started this in graduate school, writing with rapidograph pens, because I found myself living a completely verbal world. And it was great to just do contour drawings of trees or people or whatever. So I know what you mean, getting the words out of your head, and then you come back a little more refreshed.
Right. Because there are the words of everyday parlance which surround us and drown us, and I think with social media now, it's there too, and then there's the words that can shape a vision, and the people can step into, and sometimes they get totally mushed up, so you have to get them all out of your head.
Do you think there's ever such thing as too much poetry being written?
No.
Oh, okay.
There may be too much poetry being read, but no. No, I mean, I just, if someone wants to write it, they should. I can't imagine. Yeah. I don't know. What about you?
Well, we don't want to stop anyone from writing. I thought at some point that, the way the government pays farmers not to grow soybeans, that you can pay people not to write poetry for a year.
Well, that would be a test.
There's never been more written, though. I mean, if you just think of it in purely quantitative terms, with MFA programs churning out writers every semester, and it's quite amazing how poetry has caught on, especially with young people, and the poetry out loud and performance poetry. It's an amazing outlet. And we have the phenomenon of Amanda Gorman.
That's right.
Who's graduating to the Super Bowl. I don't know if that's a graduation from the inauguration. She's stepping down to a national sports phenomenon. But she's quite amazing, and really showed how real magic, real ability for performance. And also, I printed out that poem, and I looked at it, and it has alliteration all over the place, internal rhyme. It has what's called anaphora, right, the beginning of the lines, and that's all Whitman.
Yes, it is. It is.
I don't know if she just internalized that, or but she went to Harvard, so she knows Whitman anyway.
She must know Whitman. Yes, right.
But,
Yes.
But it had real literary qualities to it.
It did. It did.
Yeah.
And it was absolutely, aptly suited for that moment. I mean, it couldn't have been better to have that voice, that delivery, and that Whitman-esque poem coming out, and the excitement that she's generated. I just say, oh, go ahead. If you can get poetry into the Super Bowl, fine. I'm fine. Well, I mean, isn't part of it, I think so many people, Billy, are just they either are terrified of poetry or they think that they don't understand it, and therefore, it's something apart, it's something elite, whereas I think both you and I feel that poetry is right there on the ground with everything else. It's every day that we walk through, right?
No, I think James Tate said poetry is everywhere. It just needs editing.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Well, I have a feeling it's almost time to turn to
some questions.
To the audience. Is that right, Lauren?
Yeah. Let me just pop back on here.
If there are any.
We have quite a few questions. I first want to start by thanking you both so much for being our guinea pigs here for the first Write America. It was such a joy to listen to both of you read your work. This is really a once in a lifetime kind of event here. So I'm just so happy to be here. And before we start the Q&A, I just want to let people know, if you have a question for Billy and Rita, just find it's going to be somewhere down here. There's a button that says ask a question. Just click that and you can submit a question for Billy and Rita. And there's also a button down here that says where you can buy signed copies of Rita and Billy's works. So you can click that button or visit bookreview.com to buy some signed copies. So let's take a question. I'm really glad you guys were just actually talking about Amanda Gorman, because that was the first question that we got. This one's from Agnes. How is inauguration poet Amanda Gorman going to affect contemporary poetry?
Well, I do know that she has excited a whole raft of young poets. The young people who aren't poets yet, even, and now they want to read poetry, they want to write poetry. So, there's a whole generation that's going to rise up that's going to be much more attuned to poetry, which is great.
It's an awesome thing. Absolutely. Now let me see here. The next one. This one's from Decky, I believe. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. How would you say the place poetry holds in contemporary or popular culture has changed over the decades that you've been writing?
Wow, that's a long one, isn't it?
A large one. Well, Joseph Epstein, back in it was the late 90s, I think, but he wrote an essay on contemporary American poetry. And he said that if you had to describe the state of American poetry, contemporary poetry, in a phrase, he would say it's flourishing in a vacuum. In other words, there's more of it being written, and this is all the more so today. There's more of it being produced. There are more magazines. There's online poetry, MFA programs up to there are 300 of them now. But the audience for poetry has not expanded a lot. I mean, if you had something to figure out proportionality, there are always more poets than there are readers, it seems, because I don't know. I mean, there are reasons why, but there's lots of activity, but it doesn't really break out into the general public. So then you have a phenomenon like Amanda Gorman, and there are other moments where the audience can be enlarged, but it's I think very much insular kind of activity. It's not preaching to the masses, but just reading to the masses,
Mhm.
reading to the choir, I should say.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that when I first began writing poetry and publishing poetry and stuff like that, there was an audience. I knew what it was. It was other poets, basically, or people who wanted to be poets, but it was very small. And there was also this sense that that's all you could hope for, um, and it has changed over the years. I think that every time I've gone into a classroom of young people, the thing that always strikes me, if they haven't really been in touch with poetry before, is how amazed they are that it exists. It's that I didn't know poetry was like that. And I'm not talking about my poems. I'm talking about, even hearing uh, T.S. Eliot, or they just say, I didn't know it was like that. And you go, well, how can we get this across? So it has changed. And I think that more and more people are beginning to see that it's like that. But I agree with Billy. It does seem that there are always more poets than there are people who will just listen to it.
Well, I think we're all the same way. I mean, we didn't know poetry was like that. I mean, I remember when I was like in college or high school, even reading this anthology by Donald Hall and Lewis Simpson, and of new and contemporary American new poets of England and America, and coming across Tom Gunn, and he had a poem. He has some poems about motorcyclists, and he has a poem called Elvis Presley. I didn't know you could write about Elvis Presley. I didn't know you could write about rock and roll. And there's often the door swings open. Then
Yeah.
if you can write about Elvis Presley, I can write about Fats Domino. And so, but I didn't know you could do that. And I think and that's because I wasn't paying attention. I didn't have that anthology in my hand.
Yeah.
And that's why people don't know it's poetry. They haven't paid attention. They haven't been exposed to it.
Yeah. It's almost as if they they feel that they have to ask permission to enter, permission to write about this, permission to,
Right. It's hard to give
accept
yourself. It's hard to give yourself permission.
Yeah.
Unless
That's
you're
true.
making a bold move. Okay. That answers
All
that.
right. We have another here from Johnny. This is for both of you. You have two very different yet equally elegant voices. Why do you think you've evolved to have the voice you have now? Is it personal experience or a dedicated focus or desire to discuss certain topics?
No, neither. I think you develop your voice by reading other poets. Plain and simple. I don't think you find a voice by self-examination or introspection. Your voice does not lie within you and dying to be released and fly out of your mouth like a bird. You learn to find a voice by reading other people. Ed Hirsch said that one of the paradoxes of the writing life is that originality requires imitation first. So I found my voice by imitating lots of other poets, and also discovering poets that I shouldn't be imitating, that were not helpful to me, that were useless. And there were a lot of dead ends where I was imitating poets and just going down a path of imitation and finding a dead end. But poets I could absorb, like I don't know, Coleridge and Whitman, and learning a little bit from everybody. And my voice is a kind of combination of lots of other voices, but it's all. It's your voice has an external source. It's in the library. It's on the bookshelves. You have to read. Don't worry about having something to say.
Yeah.
Everybody has something to say. Everybody has an interesting life. But that doesn't make you a writer.
No.
Reading makes you a writer.
And yeah, I mean, I love what you said about everybody has an interesting life, and that's the first step. But I've had students as they want to know what their voice is, how can they find their voice, and I'm like, you don't. First of all, you don't really go looking for it. You listen, and as you read, you might find yourself pulled to somebody, or you also might find yourself saying, I hate that. I really hate the way that works. I'm not like that. I would also say, though, Billy, that for me, at least, whatever my voice is, because I don't try to analyze it too much, but whatever my voice is, it also has some influences that are not in the library. I mean, music is a great influence for me. I know that I hear the music, and I can hear the jazz, and it affects my rhythms. It's because I grew up around music, but also I just firmly believe that a poem has to sing. Now, it might sing in a different way, than mine. And I think tonight you could see we're both singing, but it's a different kind of, stride. And I love that. There's enough room for all those voices, but I do know that the idea of imitation is really great too. When you start out, you just start writing, and you love someone, you want to be them, and then you try to write like them, and it doesn't. The places where it doesn't work actually is where your voice is beginning to grow, right? That's where your voice is beginning to grow out of that twig. So, yes, I loved Sylvia Plath, and yet I knew that wasn't going to be me. I could not be that out with my anger, as you were mentioning earlier, Billy. But the rhythms of those fairy tale rhythms, the curses, kind of stuck with me. And so I carried that along. I couldn't be Langston Hughes in that kind of buoyancy, but I could get the syncopation and so on. So yeah, the voice.
Well, one more thing. This is not a very polite way to put it, but finding your voice is a competitive situation. Finding your voice means being able to write like nobody else can. That's what your voice is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how many people can play the saxophone in their own way that you hear like 6 or 7 notes and it's Ben Webster or John Coltrane or whatever? Well, not that many. Considering how many saxophones there are in the world, well, too many, maybe. Seamus Heaney, when he finished the poem Digging, and he's very modest, he's not boasting about it, he said he read that poem back very early in his career, and he realized that nobody else could have written that poem but him. That's what finding your voice is.
Yeah. It's like, Billie Holiday said that, they say that nobody sings hunger like I do. And that's your voice. It's true. But you can't get your voice by trying to be like no one else. You can't try. All you can do is
it ends. It's a realization. It ends. You end up discovering it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see here.
No one will ever ask that question again. That has been so well answered.
Now we have one from Lenora. This is a question for both of you. Do you embrace favorite words or take them or leave them in your poetry?
Favorite words. Well, Bill Matthews said that every writer has because that's an interesting question, but he said that it turns out that every writer has the exact same favorite word, and the word is forthcoming.
It's in a book that's forthcoming.
You said you had a forthcoming book.
I have a forthcoming book.
This is also called The Calm Before the Calm.
Yes.
Before your book comes out.
Yes.
I don't know.
A great feeling. Do you have favorite words?
I have a favorite. I have a disfavorite word. I have the word cicada drives me crazy. And
Why?
I don't know, but I'll just
Wait.
stop reading. And if a poem has cicada, I just stop. I'm out. I just turn the page.
There was a time when the word royal would drive me crazy, and if I saw
Royal?
it, royal,
Royal.
ROIL, yeah, and it's so over the top dramatic that it would drive me crazy.
I think we're allowed to have these indefensible positions on words. If you don't like the word, I just don't like cicada. Leave me alone with that.
Okay, you're fine. I love the word ragamuffin. That's one of my favorites.
Ragamuffin. I like epiphonetic. No, that's not a word. Epiphanic. No. Yeah.
I've been trying all my life to get ragamuffin in a poem, but someday.
Well, I put labradoodle in a poem. Why not?
Yes, you did. It's so great. You see, we love the sound of the words because the words, words which they have sound, they have meaning, they have history, they have texture, all this stuff, which is really our medium. This is our clay. This is how we work, a poem.
Yeah, there's a lot of difference between like violet and groin. Let's say those are two words.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
I'm digging through these questions because we do have quite a few and not much time left. Let's see. This is going back to Amanda Gorman, but specifically about her poetry. What do you think about including poetry in the inauguration and upfront endorsement of the arts so absent in the previous administration? We kind of talked about this a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's great too. I mean, to have poetry. I mean, this country doesn't seem to realize that culture, that the arts are actually, in a way, it's fingerprint or its signature. That's what's going to be left behind when the powers that are up there now, dissolve, will be the art and the books and the architecture and the music, and why not celebrate it then? So I say yes.
I'm a great believer in poetry in public places.
Yeah.
And what could be more public than the Super Bowl or the inauguration?
Yes.
But I've been with the Poetry Society of America for many years, and we do poetry in motion on subways and buses. And I'm all for poetry in billboards or poetry in unexpected places. Mm-hmm. I think getting it out of the library and out of the classroom is a good idea. I think the reason a lot of people don't read poetry is that they associate it with a classroom experience. They come across it in school. It's often badly taught or brutally taught, and they leave it behind in school. They graduate from college, and they think, well, we never have to read another poem again. Whew. And we'll never have to do trigonometry either. Oh boy, this is fun. But that's where it's left.
Yeah.
And they won't rediscover it because they're not going to pick up a book of poems. But if they're on a subway and they see a poem, or if they're watching the Super Bowl and they can still understand anything.
Yeah.
She'll change a lot of people's minds about what poetry is next Sunday.
I agree. I mean, I've had poems put up as a mural. There's one here at the university, so that's someone can just come by and they stumble upon the words and they don't know that at first glance where it's from, so they aren't afraid of it. I think there should be flash mobs with poetry. Just like suddenly someone says a word and then another, and then it's Walt Whitman all over the place. It'd be great.
Well, they don't. You're right. They get ambushed by the poem.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd like to say they don't have time to deploy their anti-poetry deflector shields, from Star Trek. And they're kind of enjoying this thing.
Yeah.
It's a poem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I might try that at the bookstore. Just jump out from behind a shelf and start reciting one of your poems. I don't know if our customers will like being scared like that, but we could try it.
You try it at the Piggly Wiggly where they're really not expecting it.
There you go.
But you need a couple of people to do it. So you'll say a word and then someone else will answer. And from another place, from over by the lettuce or something.
Sounds perfect. Now we have one here from Amy. This is for either of you. Is there a poem or a line that you might read to someone that you're trying to bring back from the dark side? And then she puts in parentheses, the dark side of our country.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Poems that are trying to bring me anywhere, or convert me to something, or trying to make me not feel what I'm feeling. And I tend to give, it's like the cicada problem I tried. If I feel a poem is trying to get at me, it has an agenda, and it's stuck in that agenda, and it's not going to discover anything as the poem is written. And therefore there's no discovery for me or surprise as a reader. So I just wouldn't recommend, I just wouldn't read poems that are trying to rescue people from some position. I don't think poetry really works that way. I think poetry gives individual pleasure to people. Like Yeats said, a girl in the indolence of her youth, or an old man upon a winter's night. Those are the poetry is an intimate experience, and I believe in poetry in public places, but those poems are not public poems in that sense. They're poems that it's one interior part of an interior person to another interior. So,
I think too that poetry in public places, what happens is that, like you said, Billy, it's a really intimate moment, but you also realize that you are one intimate piece of identity in a larger world, and that connection of your soul to the heart of the world is what happens in public poetry, whether you hear it or whether you come across it, in a mural or something, or on the subway.
Yeah, I don't care for poems that are coming after me.
No.
Even in a flash mob? No, I'm just kidding. All right, let's see. We have one here from Nick Flynn, who is actually one of our writers participating in Write America. So let me see. This one is, if you had been invited to the White House in the past 4 years, would you have gone?
Oh, that's
rough. No.
If I were invited by myself, no. But we had a whole bunch of people.
Well,
there was when Bush II invited a lot of people to the White House. I actually had something to do, actually, and I couldn't be there. But then they decided not to do it. They boycotted the invitation, turned down the invitation, which came, I think, more from Laura Bush than the president.
Yeah.
And I thought, what a mistake. Why be pouty about this? Why not get inside the White House? Didn't they learn anything from the guerrilla warfare of the 60s? Get inside the White House, and we're going to read some poems about daffodils. And then set off a stink bomb, do a protest. So I'm inclined not to say, but I think the last 4 years was a hopeless case. So I think
I agree. I agree. I think that back then when that was boycotted, I remember that I think poets were not sufficiently trained in how to stage a protest, and so they
guerrilla warfare.
Right, in guerrilla warfare. But because you have to do something like that. When you're inside of the White House and being invited into those kind of public spaces, it's really hard as a single person to get your point across. It can easily be manipulated by the powers that be. It's very hard. So, but a group, they couldn't really do much about it. What I loved about the years, the Clinton years and the Obama years, is that they every time I'd been invited to the White House, they never asked me what I was going to read. No one ever tried to look over a poem first. And I thought that trust that whatever the poem was going to say was going to be fit, was.
Well, you would not have that freedom in other countries.
No, absolutely not.
Well, that's the freedom we're trying to protect here.
That's true. It's true.
Good question, Nick.
And now
I'd like to get Nick's answer.
Right.
This one's from Sharon Doyle. She says, in these political polarizing times, is there a place for us conservatives in the poetry world? I belong to poetry groups and everyone is liberal and I am feeling silenced.
I think it takes a lot of bravery on your part to belong to that group, and it's easy for me to say, to write your stories and to write them. The thing you want to do is write the best damn poem you can. And when you do that, the other person will walk with you. I mean, now whether they agree with you is another story, but I've read, there are poems which have moved me deeply that, I don't necessarily agree with their political turnings, but that poems are not about whether you are liberal or conservative, right? They're about how you live and move through the world and see it.
That's all. I was just about to. That's all I'd say is that I don't write as a liberal or a conservative. Yeah. I'm thinking of myself as progressive, but that doesn't. I'm writing as a person when I write. So if you're writing from a liberal point of view or from a conservative point of view, then I think you should be writing an op-ed piece or an essay. You shouldn't be writing poetry.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's see. We have maybe time for one more. Oh, Lori says, so now I'm in tears. Thank you for reminding us that poetry on whatever topic can represent the people's voice. So that's a nice little thing.
That's what we're trying to do here.
And let's see, let's take one more. This one's from Pamela. Are you expected to write certain poems as a poet laureate?
No,
you're not.
No,
you're not.
You can be asked to, and I was asked once, and I wrote something. But yeah. I had, we take the poet laureate from the English, the British, right? So that's that they came up with that 370 something years ago. And when I was poet laureate, I had dinner with Andrew Motion in London, and he was poet laureate then, and I was poet laureate, and we didn't know the history, but we assumed that probably the two poets laureate had never got together for dinner, and so we made this an official occasion. But and we talked about our different roles and all that. And the British poet laureate that's their job, is to write occasional poems. And I think the Queen Mother died shortly after, and he had to write a poem of the Queen Mother, or some Viscount falls on his sword and you have to produce a poem for that. At the end of the dinner, I said to him, so the difference, Andrew, is that the British poet writes occasional poems and the American poet laureate just writes occasionally.
Yeah, I never wrote something while I was poet laureate, a poem about something.
What about the Statue of the Liberty, Miss Liberty?
Well, that happened, that actually happened before I became poet laureate. I had been named, and then in May, I think, and I went down to Washington to kind of tour the poetry, the library, which is amazing, and the poetry office, and to find out if there was a budget, and there wasn't, that kind of thing. And as I was standing there looking out the window, I saw the statue down in the parking lot. So I wrote the poem over that summer, and there was no place for it. It's just what I felt. And then they asked if I could say a few words. That's always the way they'd say it. You say a few words or have a poem, and it was there. And so it felt occasional, and it was an occasion, but it was private and intimate occasion, right? I can't imagine doing what Andrew had to do, writing about the cat or something, the Majesty's cat.
Corgis, yeah.
Or the corgis, yes.
All right, well, I think that is where we are going to end it tonight. I want to thank you again so much for being here, Rita and Billy. Are there any words that you would like to leave us with here?
Well, thank you, Lauren, and thank you, everyone who's listening in, and thank you, Roger Rosenblatt, for creating this vessel, which we have now launched, and I look forward to tuning in some other Monday nights. Especially
yes,
Nick, that wise guy Nick Flynn is reading. I want to ask him. I got a question for you.
I'm ready for you, Nick. We're coming for you. No, I really want to say thank you. It's been wonderful to be able to just sit and talk with Billy. I mean, usually we're kind of like facing out toward the spotlight, and this is, which is what we all have to do, whether it's poetry or not. We just have to really talk to one another. And so I thank Roger too for making us do it, making us want to do it, which we did, and for dreaming this up. Thank you so much. And then I'll be there on Mondays. Difficult questions.
A huge thank you to Roger. We really would not be here without him. The only way that tonight could have been better is if we could have all been sitting in person. But maybe this wouldn't have come around at all if it wasn't for the pandemic. We wouldn't be able to do this. So I guess it kind of took a way of working out. But thank you again so much for being here, and we'll see you all on Monday with Francine Prose and Paul Muldoon. So thank you, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.